Hi, I'm Ben Solomon. Today we are going to ask an outrageous question of science, quantum theory in particular. Why can I do this? Because I am the author of this book, An Introduction to Gravity Modification, and I solved the gravity modification physics. One of the most important results, there are many, one of the most important results is the formula G is equal to tau c squared, which gives gravitational acceleration without knowing the mass of the planet or the star, and therefore it becomes a propulsion equation and a force field equation. Now, the reason why I say that this is an outrageous question, and I'll get to that question in a minute, is because in 2013, the American Physical Society had their annual April meeting in Denver, Colorado. I had time to talk to some of the young physicists who were attending the conference, and I showed them some of my work in my book and asked for their response. It was basically that they were not willing to commit career suicide by working on something that was not mainstream being relativity, string, or quantum theories. Before we look at this outrageous question, there is one concept we need to look at. It is falsifiability. Princeton University defines falsifiability as falsifiability or refutability is the logical possibility that an assertion could be shown false by a particular observation or physical experiment. That something is falsifiable does not mean it is false. Rather, it means that if the statement were false, then its falsehood could be demonstrated. The claim, "no human lives forever," is not falsifiable, since it does not seem possible to prove wrong. In theory, one would have to observe a human living forever to falsify that claim. On the other hand, all humans live forever is falsifiable, since the presentation of just one dead human could prove that statement wrong. Moreover, a claim may be true and still be falsifiable. If all humans live forever were true, we would never actually find a dead human, and yet that claim would still be falsifiable because we can at least imagine the observation that would prove it wrong. Some statements are only falsifiable in theory, while others are even falsifiable in practice, example, testable. For example, "it will be raining here in 1 billion years" is theoretically falsifiable, but practically not so. That is, a hypothesis is falsifiable if one could imagine an experiment that could disprove it, and it is testable if one could implement or conduct an experiment that could disprove the hypothesis or theory. I would describe this as the strong form of falsifiability, because you need to present an experimental case that could disprove the theory. This allows us to extend the concept of falsifiability to the weak form, and that is when two hypotheses or theories explain a natural observation in very different ways. For example, gravity. You have relativity, which explains gravitational forces in terms of geometry, and you have quantum gravity and strings, which explains gravity in terms of particles. Therefore, necessarily, both theories falsify the other. That means either one is correct and one is wrong, or both are wrong. They cannot logically both be correct. Now let's ask the outrageous question. Given that there are two different types of theories to explain gravity, relativity and quantum theory, could we push the limits and ask the question, given that quantum theory is essentially the standard model, is it possible to determine an alternative standard model? Is it possible to determine two alternative standard models? Let's take this further. Is it possible to determine more than two, more than three alternative standard models? If you look at string theory today says that there are 10 to the power 500 models of the universe, and these are more models than there are atoms in our universe. Another reason why I asked the question whether alternative standard models are possible, are feasible, is because of this article published in the Scientific American titled Supersymmetry: A Crisis in Physics. Let me read from the section titled Dimensional Transmutation. The proton is not an elementary particle. It is made up of an assembly of three quarks, which have minuscule mass, and gluons, which have no mass at all. The proton is much heavier than the sum total of the quarks and gluons inside it. Wow! Where does this mass come from? And therefore, as a means of increasing the avenues of research into particle physics, a simple solution would suggest that the quarks, who have minuscule mass compared to the proton, are bound within the proton in a manner equivalent to the electrons being bound in the atomic shell. And therefore, the mass of the proton is derived by the high velocity these quarks move within the proton. And finally, there is a third reason why I asked this outrageous question about alternative standard models. This is a picture from CERN showing a lead-to-lead collisions. The two red lines are the two muons, these two red lines here and this one here. And the mass of orange lines, this mass of orange lines here, are the tracks of other particles produced in the collision. The hadron calorimeter is the blue cuboids. The question I ask is, are we so focused on the standard model's results that we look at the individual particles and we ask the question, does it fit the mathematical model? The muon, yes, it fits the mathematical model. This muon also fits the mathematical model. But these particles, they don't fit, so we don't care. Is that true? So if that is how we are searching through this maze of millions of particles for something that matches our model, could not therefore exist a set of alternative particles that could produce an alternative standard model?